key element of our bike network. And I just want to highlight that this project will include enhanced lighting, it will include path widening where feasible, and much safer road crossings. And the lighting and the road crossings in particular, I can't tell you how many complaints my office receives on those 2 points. And so this is a major deal, big deal that we're going to be able to make these improvements. We received some funding from the county, and ultimately we are going to be putting 2.3 million towards these improvements. So I'm just really delighted that we're finally at this phase of getting the community input. And also, as we plan to create homes at the North Berkeley BART station, this is part of our station access plan to have a safe Ohlone Greenway. So with that, I want to turn it back over to the team, and I really look forward to learning more about this project.
Okay, great. Thank you, Councilmember Kesarwani. I'll go ahead and move on here. Okay, so the purpose of this meeting, this project is intended to improve safety along a portion of the Ohlone Greenway in North Berkeley from Virginia Gardens, which is approximately where the basketball courts are, to Santa Fe Avenue, which is near the city boundary with Albany. So the two main purposes of the meeting are for the public to understand the rationale and design considerations that guided the development of proposed design concepts. And two, to receive input from the public in order to finalize the design concepts. So before we go further, I'd like to discuss how this meeting will be conducted. So the meeting will be recorded. We have 2 hours for the meeting, which includes a presentation by the city. And there's actually a few opportunities within the presentation for the public to ask questions and provide comments. So we'll prompt you when those times come. We'll try to save at least half of the time of the meeting for public input. If you want to be on the project email notification list, please provide your name and email address using the QA button on Zoom, and provide that information, and we'll put you on the project email list. Alternatively, you could also email ohlone.greenway@cityofberkeley.info to request to be added to that list. We will post updates on the project website periodically, including a list of frequently asked questions and associated responses. The city will conduct the presentation, like I said, there'll be a few times for the public to ask some questions and provide comments. And also at the end of the presentation, we'll have a longer portion for Q&A. So when those times come, when you're prompted, if you wish to speak, raise your hand using Zoom so that the host can call on you. Then unmute your microphone and turn on your camera if you'd like, if we have that capability. I'm not quite sure. We'll see how this goes. And you'll have up to 90 seconds to speak. You may also type questions in the Q&A button, but due to us running this meeting, we may not be able to get to all of those. But we will look as any messages, typed questions come in. If there are common themes, then we'll try to raise those and respond to those during the Q&A portion. So the agenda for today's meeting are to talk about the background of the project, which includes project goals and factors that influence the direction of the project, including design considerations, what's been done so far, what's upcoming, a little bit about the, oh, sorry, I'm a little bit out of order. We'll also talk about the project budget and schedule, and then we'll try to focus most of our presentation on the review of the conceptual design options, which were included in the public survey. So those of you who have taken the survey have seen those. And then we'll have a conclusion. So as far as the scope goes, the project, like I said, starts at Virginia Gardens, which is on the right side of the screen. All of the project areas are shown in red. So we've got these red circles, which represent intersections in the scope of the project. And then we've got the red lines, which represent pathway segments that are also part of the scope. So we're going to pick up on the right side of the screen at Virginia Gardens, where BART is going to soon be improving a portion of the Ohlone Greenway shown in blue. And then we'll work our way northward, which is to the left of the screen, and we'll cover the 7 intersections: Virginia Gardens, Cedar, Rose, Hopkins, Peralta, Gilman, and Santa Fe, as well as the pathway segment shown here. In particular, the pathway does go through Cedar Rose Park. It goes past the tennis courts and pickleball courts, as well as the vegetated segment that's between Peralta and Gilman. So the project's goals are to upgrade the existing multi-use pathway. We are focused on improving the safety of intersections, mainly for the pathway users, widening the pathway to 12-foot or greater where feasible, improving the connection at the pathway gap on Peralta Avenue, which is shown in the photo here. We're also looking to enhance the pathway lighting where needed, and then do landscaping work as needed, primarily to improve visibility. So the next few slides in this presentation touch upon the numerous constraints and considerations that the city needs to take into account in developing these concepts to address those project goals. In this slide, several council-approved citywide plans play a role in the big picture overall development of this project. The main ones being the bicycle plan, which I bolded here, the pedestrian plan, the climate action plan, and the strategic plan. Interdepartmental design considerations are also a factor. This slide summarizes design constraints posed by existing trees, which limit pathway widening opportunities and affect lines of sight. So the trees and park areas are managed by the city's Parks Department. And one of their goals is to maintain a park-like atmosphere in Cedar Rose Park, which includes the grove of trees and the grassy area. And the Parks Department tries to maintain trees unless they are in poor condition. They typically remove trees that are in imminent danger. However, capital projects such as the Ohlone Greenway project may also require removal of trees. These would be trees that are in conflict with proposed pathway improvements, with the focus on ones that are already in poor condition, but may not necessarily be in imminent danger. In particular, there's a city ordinance that restricts the removal of coast live oak trees unless certain conditions are met, which include a tree being a danger to people and/or property. Later in this presentation, we'll show 2 coast live oak trees on Peralta Avenue that the project is proposing to remove in order to install a mid-block crosswalk as per the bike plan. These trees cannot be removed unless suitable rationale exists. In general, the proposed project improvements cannot substantially increase the impact to trees, including their root systems. This means that in the grove of trees in Cedar Rose Park, for example, the existing pathway cannot be widened at its current location, and any proposed rerouting would need to be at least 30 feet away from existing large trees. However, routing a pathway on the opposite side of the trees would affect the usability of the green space, which conflicts with one of the goals of the Parks Department. To get a better idea of the types of trees along the project corridor and their condition, the design team included a project arborist to catalog and evaluate almost 300 trees. We reviewed the results with the city's urban forestry group to develop recommendations for selective removal of trees only where necessary to accommodate specific project elements. Mitigation for proposed tree removals are included in the long-range tree planting plan for Cedar Rose Park, which was developed by the city's urban forestry group, which will be shown in detail later in this presentation. So there's other interdepartmental and external considerations, and they're shown on this slide. Our concept includes input from the fire department. And some of those inputs are a minimum lane width of 11 feet to accommodate newer fire trucks having a width of 10'6", a minimum roadway clear space generally of 26 feet with a few exceptions to accommodate aerial apparatus equipment near multi-story buildings, maintaining emergency access routes for efficient travel and expedited response times, which include Cedar Street, and sufficient intersection space for maneuvering and turning the fire department's larger vehicles, which include pumper trucks. Our concepts also take into account the necessary space for maneuvering other large vehicles that frequently use the roadways, including waste collection trucks and school buses. Funding also plays a role in the delivery of this project. The city applied for and received grant funding for this project. The project is funded by Alameda County Vehicle Registration Fee Funds, along with County Measure BB funds, which are both administered by the Alameda County Transportation Commission. So ACTC administers the funds, the city manages the funds and delivers the project. The city is also contributing funds for this project. Funding is intended to cover all phases of this project, and the project phases are shown on the next slide. One thing I wanted to point out is currently there are sufficient funds to complete the design of the project, but there are not enough funds to complete the construction. And so this means that the project is cost constrained and additional funds will be needed to construct the selected design concepts, whatever they are. And so costs may play a role in the design elements that are ultimately included in the project. So as far as the project status goes, it's currently in the conceptual design phase, which is shown in the blue rectangle on the left. It's the first of 4 project phases. The next phases are detailed design, which includes project plans, then the bid and award phase, and then finally the construction phase. And so the currently the schedule as it stands is, in order to complete conceptual design, we need to receive public input, evaluate it, and make revisions to the proposed concepts. Then if needed, we'll need to go to the Transportation and Infrastructure Commission and Council. And so we're thinking that would be in March and April. And then if we're able to get whatever issues that we are asking Commission and Council to weigh in on to get resolution to those issues, then we would proceed into the detailed design phase, which is looking like mid 2023 into early 2024. And then we would go to the bid and award of the construction contract early to mid 2024, and then into construction, which is assuming that we're able to procure the remaining construction funds. So in summary, the proposed concepts thus far have taken into account the following design considerations, which are shown on this slide, many of which I've already discussed. And there's also some other design considerations which I haven't discussed yet, which are listed here, that they include state and federal standards, which pertain to pathway widening, coordination with the city's ongoing Hopkins Corridor project, on-street parking, collision history at intersections, and then also any initial community input that we've already received. So all of these are factors that have gone into the concepts that we have prepared for this presentation and which are included in the survey. So what's been done so far? Like I said, we've developed some conceptual design options, and then we've also done extensive outreach to the community you can see on the bullet points here, we've done some pre-outreach to some of the residents and community gardens near the Peralta Hopkins area. We've mailed postcards to residents within a 300-foot radius as per the city's public policy standards. We've also posted sidewalk decals and posted flyers. We've set up a project website. We have a mass email notification as well as, generating an email list. So, and for those of you who have joined us a little bit late, please, if you'd like to be included in future email notifications, include your name and email address by pushing the Q&A button. Provide that information to us and we'll put you on the email list. There's also been a council member newsletter that has been sent out to promote this project. There's been citywide communications. There's been the survey, which will remain open for another week, and then today's community meeting. So what's upcoming? So the next planned steps are to review the survey data and other input from the public, such as input that we received from the on-site survey launch a couple of weeks ago, as well as emails that we've received. We will determine if the project can proceed at a city staff decision-making level, which typically means that a project substantially conforms to citywide plans and policies. However, if the project does not meet these general criteria, or if there's some sort of a conflict between these citywide plans and policies, then the project may need to be reviewed by the Transportation and Infrastructure Commission, which is an advisory body to the council comprised of citizen representatives from each council district, and or the city council as appropriate. Based on the input that I've been getting, and our further look into the details of this design, I think it's likely that some elements of this project will need a council decision. And I'm going to discuss that in a couple of slides from now. So you may wonder a little bit more about what the survey is showing so far. And as Council Member Kesarwani indicated, we've got over 500 responses since the survey started 2 weeks ago, and it'll remain open until March 1st. Data from the survey, along with other public input, will be used to confirm the council-approved recommendations in the bike plan and to justify any proposed deviations. Note that public input is not considered, strictly speaking, it's not a vote for any particular concept, but the data will be used to inform decisions at any level, be it staff, commission, and or council. Several comments and themes surfaced from the online project survey, which include the need for lighting, the need for widening and intersection safety improvements, the desire for separating users of different speeds, like pedestrians and bikes, accessibility concerns, and there's just many more inputs that we've received as well that we're still categorizing and sorting through and evaluating. So now I'm going to get back to the project scope, which mainly originated from the citywide bike plan. The graphics show 2 excerpts from the bike plan, which emphasize the crossings at Cedar Rose, Hopkins, and Peralta, as well as a separated 2-way on-street bikeway, which I'll call a cycle track on Peralta. That's shown in green on the graphic on the left. So we recognize that the bike plan conflicts with the Parks Department policies and the city ordinance regarding preservation of coast live oak trees. And so what I'd like to call the public's attention to, and what I'm requesting input from the public on, is how if you could provide input on how we would like council to resolve these policy conflicts. And so input can be provided via the online survey if you haven't taken the survey already. It can also be provided during the Q&A portions of this meeting or via email to the project email account. So there's two issues here that I'm requesting public input on. The first one is let's see. Yeah, the first one is shown on the left. And it's the conflict between the bike plan and the ordinance on preserving coast live oak trees. Removal of 2 coast live oaks, both of which are in poor condition and are located along the east side of Peralta, would be needed to construct a crosswalk across Peralta as per the bike plan. So I'm showing that in the red circle on the left. The 2 coast live oak trees are located pretty much in line with that proposed new crosswalk. Then the second issue is a conflict between the bike plan and the park department policies on preserving greenery and open space in parks. The pathway through Cedar Rose Park is 8 feet wide, but the bike plan calls for widening to at least 12 feet. Widening could occur if several of the smaller trees along the east side of the pathway are removed, but it's still going to result in a pinch point where one of the large trees exists and the property boundary is close to the other side of the pathway. Alternatively, a pathway could be routed through the open green space, but would need to stay 30 feet away from the larger trees in order to not impact the tree roots, and would need to keep the open green space to a maximum. So the next several slides are a brief overview of various design elements that are included in the proposed design concepts. So I wanted to just put some pictures here so you could visualize some of these elements. So here I'm showing a raised crosswalk, which is the same height as the adjacent sidewalks. Typically that's about 6 inches high, but it's going to match the sidewalks. Raised crosswalks slow down vehicles to about 15 miles an hour, thereby reducing stopping distance for vehicles. Raised crosswalks should be perpendicular to the flow of traffic. Median refuge island, which provides a midway stopping point for pathway users, allowing them to focus on one direction of traffic at a time. Concrete bikeway buffers, which provide separation and protection between a bikeway and the adjacent vehicle lane, and are more robust than buffers constructed with paint and plastic posts. The concrete buffers would be designed to be mountable by emergency vehicles. Higher visibility markings in the roadway at intersections, including advanced yield markings, which are those triangles on the left, and 444 type crosswalks, which are shown in the picture on the right, both of which are typically more visible to drivers than standard crosswalk markings. These markings would be reflective for nighttime visibility. Design elements also include flashing beacons, also known as rectangular rapid flashing beacons, or RRFBs, which are used to highlight the presence of a person in the crosswalk to encourage vehicles to yield. RRFBs are typically used at uncontrolled intersections with significant vehicle volume. Also, lighting at intersections and along the pathway where needed to supplement existing pathway lights. They can be either solar powered or hardwired depending on their location. Improving sightlines at intersections, which can be accomplished by widening the sidewalk along one or both sides to make pathway users more visible to motorists. Use of red curb, the lengths of which are determined based on the roadway driving speed and field of view of drivers. Making crosswalks perpendicular to the roadway, which allows for a more complete and natural peripheral view of the roadway by pathway users. And trimming and removing plants and other obstructions along the pathway to improve sightlines. Here's a figure that's kind of a generic example of the relative placement of some of these elements that I've mentioned already. So this sketch here shows a median. It shows the higher visibility markings, shows RRFBs, the flashing beacons, shows lighting, and also improved sight lines by way of red curb. So that's a brief overview of the project background. Now we'll walk you through the design concepts, which includes opportunities for you to provide comments and ask questions. Okay, so the way I've organized this is we've broken it down into segments and intersections. And so for each segment and intersection, I'll provide some data, which include collision data, any proposed tree removals, and any proposed parking space removals. And then I will hand it off to Jen Harmon, the city's lead design consultant, to describe the concept. So we'll kind of alternate back and forth for each of the locations. So the first segment to the south, which is Virginia Gardens to Cedar Street, we don't have any reported collision data over the past 10 years. We are proposing to remove 2 trees. And when we say trees, we're talking about 6-inch diameter and larger. And both of those trees are in poor condition. And then we're also proposing to remove 2 parking spaces on Virginia Gardens.
Okay, and then this is our plan view drawing of the proposed improvements at from Virginia Gardens up to Cedar Street at the top of the page. So starting at the proposed improvements by BART to the south of our project, there would be a widened curb ramp for the bikes and peds, and then the high visibility markings across Virginia Gardens, because there are a couple driveways, even though it's at the end of the road, just provide more visibility that this is the route that the pedestrians and bikes will be taking. And then at the entrance to the basketball court area and continuation of Ohlone Greenway, we'd have an extra wide curb ramp there to accommodate bikes and pedestrians with the 16-foot width, which is preferred. As we continue to the north, we did reduce that width to 14 feet in order to protect existing healthy mature trees. The existing path there is only 10 feet, so this still is a large improvement. And then we widen again up to meet the Cedar Street crossing.
Okay, so that leads us to the Cedar Street crossing. And we have some collision data over the past 10 years. We've got 3 bikes that have been broadsided by cars, 2 pedestrian car collisions. One of those was a pedestrian right-of-way violation, and the other one was a car right-of-way violation. At this intersection, we are not proposing to remove any trees or any on-street parking spaces.
So the proposed improvements for the crossing at Cedar Street include a lot of the features that Ken showed on the graphics previously, the rapid flashing beacons, the raised crossing, an extra wide crossing. So we have 20 feet to provide plenty of space for bikes and pedestrians to cross or to pass each other as needed through the area. And then we've transitioned so that the crossing is perpendicular without a jog on the narrow sidewalk. That widened path continues to the north until we get 30 feet within the existing mature trees. So there would be opportunity for passing bikes and pedestrians throughout this area. Lighting would also be provided at the RFB locations. And yeah, as Ken mentioned, the existing curb is already red for a good distance. And there is a area where the existing path to the north of the crossing connects now that we would transition to green space that could potentially be native planting or some other use.
Okay, and so proceeding north, we have this segment that goes through Cedar Rose Park. I don't have any data regarding reported collisions along this segment. Doesn't mean that there are no collisions. It just means that we don't have any data on that. We are proposing to remove 3 trees that are in poor condition. Those are located along the east side of the pathway in the grove of trees. Also wanted, as a reminder from what I had mentioned before, this is the portion of the pathway where I am requesting public input about the conflict between the bike plan, which includes, widening this pathway to at least 12 feet, and the parks policies, which are trees and open space. So we're trying to sort out which is more of a priority to the public.
In plan view, the improvements between Cedar Street and Rose Street include the widened area at the perpendicular crossing at Cedar Street that was mentioned before. And then this shows the big picture through the park. The existing path within the large mature trees is about 8 feet. And we would do some sort of repaving treatment in the current proposal. But the city arborist and the project arborist both agreed that any type of widening would cause damage to the existing mature trees. So right now that is not a part of the project. Moving north, as soon as we get past 30 feet from the large redwood, then we start to widen again to the 16 feet as that approaches Rose Street. We didn't have as much of a sweeping transition over to the crossing here because of existing park features. But as we look at Rose Street, we can see that there's a much widened sidewalk section to allow for bike and pedestrian passing.
So we have been talking about removing some trees, and I wanted to present to you the tree planting plan, which is proposed as mitigation for the tree removals. And our design team has worked with the city's Parks Department to develop a tree planting plan. This plan follows the Parks Department's long-term tree planting plan for Cedar Rose Park. And so the proposed new trees would be located along the west side of the existing grassy area. And it's been determined that this is the area for best future growth opportunity within the immediate project area, and provides the quickest way to reproduce the tree canopy that would be lost from the tree removals as part of this project. So we would be looking to plant at least 1-to-1 replacement to removal ratio. The types of trees are shown here in the 2 different colors. And there may be opportunities for the public to participate in tree planting. And if so, those activities would be coordinated by the Parks Department. The next segment is the Rose Street crossing. I don't have any reported collision data here over the past 10 years. We are proposing to remove 1 tree that's about 12 inches in diameter in poor condition. And that's in line with, kind of lined up with the location of the proposed new crosswalk. And we are proposing to remove 7 existing on-street parking spaces, 4 of them along the north side and 3 along the south side, to improve sight lines.
At the proposed plan at Rose Street, starting from the south, the connection to the park, we have the 16-foot minimum widened sidewalk / path area that would continue over to a perpendicular crossing to the north. The tree that is proposed to be removed is on the north side of the crossing at the corner where the courts are. And the parking removal is partially because of the proposed median in order to transition the lanes over, and also the sight lines to the crossing. There is the curved street, or the street curves to the west, and this will make the visibility much better at the crossing. This is a very similar treatment to Cedar with the rapid flashing beacons, lighting, and the raised crosswalk and median. The medians have been shown with data to narrow the lanes with a physical barrier, and also the offset transition really does force vehicles to slow down, which helps in getting them to stop when there's a pedestrian or a cyclist crossing the road.
Okay, so then we have the Rose Street to Hopkins Street segment. This is the last segment that I'm going to talk about before we take our first break for Q&A. So along this stretch, which runs past the tennis and pickleball courts, we don't have any data regarding reported collisions. We are proposing to remove 3 trees that are in poor condition, and those are along the west side of the pathway.
In order to protect the greens, I should have mentioned before, but the red dots are the trees planned to be removed, and the green are the healthy, mature trees that we're protecting. This portion of the path is approximately 11 feet wide, and we would be slightly widening to the 12-foot minimum in order to continue to protect the healthy, mature trees through this area. Continuing to the north, the connection at Hopkins, which we'll get into after the break, but the apartment driveway shares the access space to the path there. So we have some ideas on ways to improve that. But the key thing is that without affecting healthy, mature trees through this segment, we aren't able to widen more than the 12 feet minimum.
Okay, so now we have our first break, and I'd like to focus on the segments that we've already covered, which is from Virginia Gardens to Hopkins Street. We'll have about 15 minutes for this first break. We also have 2 more breaks coming up, as well as a longer session at the end for Q&A as well. So I'm wondering if one of my colleagues could help to call on some of the members of the public who have raised their hands.
I see our first raised hand is Nicole AB. I will ask you to unmute so you can ask your question.
And once
Can you hear me?
start, yes, and once you start to speak, then I'll turn on this timer, which is this blue circle on the right. And you'll just see a little hand kind of work its way around the circle. Okay, go ahead.
Nicole, you muted yourself again, so maybe you can unmute. There you
Can
go.
you hear me now?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, I think you're being inappropriately vague in a city of Berkeley where people want to know what species of trees, not just that they are trees. You never told us where the actual oak tree is. You just made reference to it. I'm not sure where that is. I know where the redwood trees are over in the park. Overall, I think your improvements to that particular intersection are great. I'm not extensively familiar with it, but I've been a pedestrian there and observed it. And I think, you know, there's good light sign, vision signs, path, you know, ways to see there. So I think that's pretty good. But I think you need to tell people what kinds of trees you're taking out. And I didn't hear you say you're replacing them one-on-one in that area. And that's all I have to say about that intersection.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so the Coast Live oak trees, I will highlight those when we move on to the next segment, which is the Hopkins Peralta segment. As far as identifying each type of tree, we do have all of that information. And I can certainly provide it, but I think it would be a lot to include in this presentation today. I can include it on the project website.
Okay, yeah.
And I
But
think
there are a lot
there's
of people
another,
that know trees in this city, so they're gonna ask you questions. You may want to avoid wasting time later by just giving people that information up
oh,
front.
sure. Okay, thank you.
Next, we have Ben Gerhardstein. I will ask to unmute you too, so you can ask your question.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for holding this meeting. I want to say that there's a lot to like in this project, and kudos to the city for putting forward some really great ideas. A couple of things that I want to highlight for this section. First is that each of the crossings where there's rectangular rapid flashing beacons proposed really need to include automatic activation for people on bike and pedestrians, not just bag buttons. And we're not seeing that in these proposals right now. If that represents too big of a cost burden, then stop signs should be considered as an alternative. One of the goals here, I think, should be for our section of the Ohlone Greenway to function just as well as our neighbors in Emeryville and up in El Cerrito, and those activation technologies are part of that. The other thing is that the Cedar Rose Park segment down to keeping it at 8 feet is really inadequate. And so I do think that there needs to be some solution there to widen the pathway. And if that means violating the park recreation policy in some way that still maintains those mature street trees, that's great. But that's the direction we need to go for this segment to work well.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so regarding the automatic activation of RRFBs, that is something that we have in our mind. We've already started doing some research on that, and we just haven't gotten to a detailed enough stage in the design to be able to call out anything specific about it. We're just kind of mainly focused on can we fit certain things in with the space that we have. And then as we move forward with the design, we'll look into these types of detailed things. And then also, I note your comment about the pathway width on Cedar Rose Park. So thank you for your input.
All right, next we have Anthony.
Hey there, thank you. My name is Anthony. I'd like to thank everyone for presenting so far. This seems like a really great project, and I'm glad you're taking the opportunity to improve the pathway. Just for this segment, I have a couple comments to echo Ben about the flashing beacons at the crossing. I also think we should make clear whether bikes are allowed to cross at the crosswalks and whether cars need to yield to bikes. There's been a lot of confusion as I ride my bike across a crosswalk. I'll get yelled at or somebody won't stop for me. So that should be done, with signs that have bikes on them at the crosswalks and with green paint across the crosswalk, especially at the Virginia Gardens area where it's such a long crosswalk. I'd like to see some continuous green paint at every crosswalk. I also support adding a pathway to the west of the trees in Cedar Rose Park. I think the best use of that park is the path. And I think the direct route of the new path should be used to separate pedestrian and bike traffic. Yeah, so thank you so much for this project. I do have a question for you about the 11-foot lanes. I'd expect at these narrow areas more like 9.5. Is that a requirement we're going to see going forward? And are we really purchasing 10.5-foot wide fire trucks? That seems very large to me. Thank you.
Yeah, as far as the lane width goes, that is information that we have been talking to the fire department about. They've reviewed these preliminary concepts, and that's some of the input they had provided. So the information that I provided to you regarding input from the fire department, that is what they have told me. As far as bike priority across intersections with signage and paint, that is something that we have identified early on as well. And so some of those details will have to work out as we progress into detailed design, but we are cognizant of those. And thank you for your input on the pathway issue through Cedar Rose Park.
Okay, next we invite Bentham Palace to speak.
All right, hi. Yeah, I'm Ben Paulus. I live right on the map here, right on Peralta Avenue. I'm a very heavy user of this path in both directions. I want to reiterate what was said earlier about the narrow path through Cedar Rose Park. There's quite a bit of conflict between bikers and pedestrians and dog walkers and et cetera on that area. So widening it would be a very good idea. In addition, the plan does not include any additional lighting in that area. That's an extremely dark area underneath those trees, and a lot of people avoid the park at night going to and from BART because of that. So I think I'd like to see 1 or 2 lights in that tree tunnel to make it a bit safer. Thanks a lot.
Okay, great, thank you. Yeah, I recognize that part of the pathway, the portion that goes through Cedar Rose Park is very dark. We are planning to put lights there. We haven't completed our lighting study yet because that's something that we would do in the detailed design stage. And so that's why we haven't shown locations of new lights. But we do intend to put lights where lights are needed, and that includes through Cedar Rose Park.
Next, we have Amy Smolens.
Hi there. You hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. I live in Albany and I travel on these segments a lot to BART and to downtown Berkeley and to Oakland, and I really appreciate these improvements. On the plans, I only see additional lighting at the intersections. I mean, the whole path absolutely needs to be lit with lights so it's safe to ride and walk in nights and early morning. And that's when so many people travel to and from BART. Without full lighting, I definitely will not take the Greenway. I take Sacramento, which isn't that great. And I would advise in particular, the lights that are similar to the lights that on the Berkeley, the Ped Bike Bridge across I-80, they're really directional, they're human scale, they're perfect for pedestrians and cyclists, and they're directional, so they would not shine into residences, such as where you have them in across from the pickleball courts, things like that. So I'm assuming you're going to put those on the Gilman Bridge too, but those type of lights are really all that's going to make it safe to ride in morning and night. Without lighting on the actual path, there's no way that people are going to feel safe biking or walking. Also agree with the flashing beacons that are activated by cyclists, pedestrian, or wheelchair motion. So we don't have to press a button to activate the warning lights, like in Emeryville and El Cerrito, like they have in their intersections. It makes crossing much, much safer. And I also agree that if you can't widen the paved path through Cedar Road Park, to put in DG or hard packed dirt around the trees and separate the users, because so many people are using e-bikes as replacement for cars, and those go faster than traditional bikes. So separated paths so everyone feels safe are really crucial. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you for your comments, and I've noted them. So how close are we to our 15 minutes for this section?
We're pretty close. There's just two more people, and
Okay.
then I have
Okay.
one comment that came in through the Q&A.
Okay, so let's try to take the two comments, and then anybody else beyond that, we can pick them up in the next segment or at the very end.
All right, so we have the two people left. Let's start with Linda Curry. Sorry, Linda, I accidentally.
Coming in 3 minutes.
Hello. Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Hi. Thank you so much for all your work on this. I live just on the east side of Cedar Rose Park, and I'm a dog walker and avid cyclist, and I'm on the pathway both north and south pretty much every day. I have concerns about the flashing beacons. I personally find that this has happened to me many times. I will stop to press and cars will fly through. And there is a flashing beacon example just south on, I'm trying to remember if is it Francisco or Delaware? It's happened to me repeatedly, and it's really a great concern for making, like you feel like, well, you press it and people are going to stop, and they don't. It happened to me today too on there's one on MLK at Virginia. Same thing, so I have great concern about that. I also am concerned about the lighting everywhere along the pathway, but particularly the middle part of the pathway at Cedar Rose. I'd like to see lighting on the pathway, but also I'm concerned about habitat and don't want too much lighting pointing upward, to disturb our wildlife and birds and other things. And keeping the native plants and trees, at the forefront. We need more trees, not less. So if we can, add more trees, that would be great. Those are my comments. Thanks.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was on mute. Thank you. I've noted your comments, and we have time for one person before we move to the next portion.
I will let Justin unmute himself, and then Dietmar Lawrence, I noted you, and you will be able to speak as the first speaker in the next Q&A round.
Hi there. I was also wondering, I think like some of the other folks here, whether the path through Cedar Rose Park could be moved to the west side of the trees. I actually use the park more than I use the pathway. But as a park user, what I'm usually there for is to like have a picnic or something, generally in the afternoon. And that's exactly where I'm looking for a shady spot, and that's really under the trees, kind of exactly where the path is running right now. And so sometimes we have groups of people going picnicking there, and that kind of causes conflict with the path users even. So as a park user, I would actually prefer that the path to be on the west side of the trees.
Okay, great. Thank you for your input. I've noted that. And
So Ken, just one
Uh-huh.
quick comment that came in on the Q&A that's related to the pathway in Cedar Rose Park was, have we looked at the idea of using a boardwalk in the area where the grove of trees is to minimize the impact to tree roots?
No, we have not. But in order to build a boardwalk, you'd have to build a structure. And I suppose any sort of structure that's supporting the boardwalk would also not be able to impact, would not be allowed to impact tree roots.
Yeah, I guess I would say
yeah.
it's something that we could possibly look at in the different ways
Yeah,
to mitigate this if we can,
We
you know,
should note it. We should note it.
localize impact.
Yeah,
That
we should-
we've also gotten that comment in the survey.
We should note it. It's worth looking into, but I don't have a response on that right now.
Yeah, and just one note on that, there could be a way to possibly bridge the root areas, but it would be much more costly, and like a structural design and also more maintenance for the city in the future. So,
Mhm.
but definitely things to look at.
Yes, agreed. Okay, so in the interest of time, I'm going to move to the next segment. So we've got these two intersections, Hopkins, Hopkins at Peralta, as well as the stretch on Peralta where there doesn't really appear to be a pathway. It's kind of a gap in the pathway. And so in this area, we have collision data from the past 10 years of 2 overturned bikes on their own, 2 cars collided with parked car or fixed object, 3 pedestrian car collisions. We're also proposing removal of 4 trees in poor condition with the possibility of 1 additional tree that's located on Hopkins. And it has yet to be determined whether that one would need to be removed, depending on the clearances for the parking lot ramp reconstruction. So proposed removal of parking spaces, we have 3 different options that we'll present. Options 1A and 1B are pretty much consistent with the bike plan. So it shows a cycle track on the east side of Peralta. But they just show on-street parking to be on different sides. That's the main difference between 1A and 1B, is where the on-street parking spaces would be. Option 2 is kind of, it's like a modified version of what's out there right now, where the cars share the lane with the bikes. And that was in response to some initial community input that we had about concerns about parking space losses. So we tried to make an option to preserve parking spaces, but also based on the volumes of vehicles and also the speeds of vehicles, we thought it was a potentially viable option, but since it conflicts with the bike plan, we'd have to have pretty much like overwhelming support for option 2 in order for it to be recommended, which we'll see what the results of the survey show. But these are proposed parking space removals. Option 1A, 12 on Peralta, plus potentially 2 on Hopkins. Option 1B, losing 10 on Peralta and potentially 2 on Hopkins. And then under option 2, losing 2 spaces on Peralta and potentially 2 on Hopkins. So we'll show it in the graphics right on the next couple slides.
Yeah, so in order to give a better feel of what the cross section of the various options would look like, we have these SketchUp cross sections, and so on the right side, the two-way cycle track, and then as Ken mentioned, the parking in this first option would be on the side of the community garden, with a 3-foot raised separation between the parking and the cycle track, and then 2 lanes in each direction. So the parking would be in this option removed from in front of the homes. And the next view shows that in a plan view. So the sorry, on the west side, the parking would be removed in this along Peralta in this first option. The 3 red dots on the east side at the crossing of Peralta, the 2 red dots on the right are the Coast Live Oaks that Ken has mentioned before. One challenge is that we did also look at more of a skewed crossing that inhibits the raised crossing that we're proposing on this concept. It's also very challenging to get a curb ramp in with all of the trees that are along the parkway along Peralta. So yeah, in order to create a safe crossing, we really feel pretty strongly about these trees being removed. The arborist did note that they, even though they are the Coast Live Oaks, they aren't in great condition, and the growing space and the conditions that they're in right now are definitely not ideal. And then on the west side of the path, the red dot on the upper right is the other tree that's being removed. It's a small tree, and it's also, that one is in poor condition. And removing that will also help with the sight lines to the path connection here, moving north along the path.
Yeah, and that tree is also a Coast Live Oak.
Oh, okay. I didn't recall that. So one thing to note with this raised perpendicular crossing, this can be incorporated into the next alternative also, alternative 1B. We just wanted to show 2 different options for crossing, but the parking, which side of the street of Peralta the parking is on, does not change the options that we have for the crossing of Peralta. Some other things that are incorporated with this option are adding the median along Hopkins and squaring up that crossing and trying to get a little separation between the parking lot and driveway access for the apartments and the curb ramp for the trail users. We have had some discussions, some preliminary discussions with the apartment building owner, and they are open to the idea of making the parking lot a one-way out only, so that there wouldn't be higher speed vehicles turning right into this driveway area where the path users are crossing. The Hopkins Street project, cycle track project, is still being discussed and decided on, and so we are keeping track of that project and any potential changes that could be involved to coordinate with that project. And the curb ramps would all be improved. There are challenges. I know there was some concerns brought up with the west side of the crossing of Peralta parallel to Hopkins. And we noted here that we are going to look at some potential visibility improvements. There is an existing driveway that shares the curb ramp location there. And there are some challenges with access to the private properties, the trash collection and some other things. So, but we do have that noted to review. And then looking at option 1B. So as Ken noted, the parking would be moved to the west side along the residences, and the cycle track then is on the east side along the community garden. When we have a separation between the cycle track and travel lanes, the separation can be reduced to 2 feet, but there still would be a raised separation providing protection to the cycle track. And then when we look at that in plan view, you can see that the 8-foot parking width along the west side in front of the houses. There are several driveways also, but in the existing condition, the parking would be between the driveways, and then parking would be removed along the community garden where the cycle track would come in. And then the crossing of Peralta, in this option, we provided a more direct route for cyclists and a perpendicular crossing for the pedestrians or cyclists if they chose to take that route. But as mentioned, we can definitely incorporate the large raised crossing that's perpendicular with this option to have the parking on the west side of Peralta. The improvements at Hopkins are basically the same for this, for all of these options. And then the final option, as Ken mentioned, the idea was just to have an option that preserved as much parking as possible. And then the cyclists would need to continue to use the sharrows in the roadway. It seems like from the initial feedback, there is less support for this option. And then in plan view, we would still incorporate a raised pedestrian crossing of Peralta at the Greenway. It's really unfortunate the way that cyclists and pedestrians are kind of dumped into the roadway without a curb ramp along the east side right now. So this would still be a big improvement in that way, and then also in the improvements to the crossing of Hopkins. But it is challenging to get the cyclists transitioned back over to the Greenway to the south. So that's why, as Ken mentioned, that it would take a lot of support for this alternative in order to go against the bike plan.
Okay, thank you, Jen. So this is our second break. Let's set aside 15 minutes for this one, because we have to get through our presentation, and we can go ahead and start calling on people with raised hands.
Yes, I'll invite Dietmar Lawrence to speak first, as he was the last person. Dietmar Lawrence, I'm asking you to unmute. If you don't want to speak up, I will just move on. Okay, seems like we're moving on to Anthony.
Yes, thank you. I wonder if you could go to 1A for me to reference. That's the option I support most. I also like 1B, but 1A is a little slightly better for me. The details, I really appreciate all the information you're giving us on the design trade-offs. I'd like to see if that Hopkins Street crosswalk can be raised. And also the crosswalk parallel to Hopkins. I think it's important that there be some kind of median there to make sure cars do make that kind of perpendicular turn rather than passing through the daylighted zone. I wonder if we can raise the bikeway up to sidewalk level through this section. I think that would be more consistent with the rest of the Ohlone Greenway and would alleviate some of the parking concerns with crossing the bikeway if we had just kind of a continuous sidewalk. And then lastly, at the crosswalk across Peralta, I wonder if we can rotate that a little bit clockwise to be more perpendicular to the angled traffic at this point. And, you know, in the detailed design, just kind of smooth over how the bikes get up onto that crosswalk at a straight ramp to rejoin the path. Yeah, that's all my detailed feedback. Thank you once again for all the options here.
Okay, great. Noted your comments. Thank you. That was very thoughtful. Could we call on the next person, please?
Yes, next would be Nicole.
Okay, I'm back. My only comment on this Peralta is I think the idea of the Sharrows is indeed a poor idea. There's a lot of bicycle traffic and car traffic at that intersection. I'd like to go back to Cedar Rose because for me, the most important question which materialized is that crossing on the north side across Cedar. That is an extremely dangerous intersection. I'm not surprised there have been people injured. I almost was hit head on once there by a car decades ago. But one of the problems with the pathway that hasn't been solved, and I think it's part of the reason there's accidents there, is that as you come to the sidewalk in the park, you suddenly have to make a turn and you're at an angle where a bicyclist cannot look to their 45-degree left and see the traffic. And you're trying to turn at the same time. And that's just extremely difficult. I make a habit of stopping there because I consider it too dangerous as a bicyclist to assume that I have the right of way. My training as a driver of a car and as a bicyclist is that in a situation like that, I believe the cars have the right of way unless something else is done. And my personal opinion is there needs to be a big stop sign there that says stop and has a picture of a bicycle, because I think bicyclists need to stop. The pedestrians are going to pause and at least look because they're traveling slower. But you've got to solve this problem of who has the right of way from my comments and from the other people, because other than that, it's going to continue to be dangerous. I've had bicyclists just see straight on across as I'm driving, and yet as a bicyclist, I have to go through the same thing. And I've done that intersection all my decades of living in West Berkeley as a bicyclist or as a driver and a bicyclist. I think that intersection needs to be heavily lit so that the cars can see, because even as I'm coming in my car, I'm looking to try to see, is somebody coming? And I can't see, there's not enough lighting at night. And so I have to really slow down there. And anything you can do to slow down the traffic and make either the bicyclist stop and the pedestrians stop or the cars stop, one or the other, otherwise people I think are going to continue to get hurt. And however you solve the problem of the pathway coming across the park, I think putting trees to the west of the pathway is just going to create another place for potential robbery of people that are bicycling. So I think you do need to solve the problem with more than lighting. I think landscaping is a factor, and keeping it low in most of that section, and maybe putting the trees that are mitigating in another area to give shade for people. you could talk to the people that use the park. There are unfortunately swamp areas because that whole thing was not prepared for the use it's got when it used to be the train tracks
Okay.
there.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I've noted your comments, and those are things that we have noticed as we bike in that area as well. So those are things that we've identified early on in the project as being items that are issues that we need to resolve once we get into detailed design. So thank you
Okay.
for your comment. Let's go to the next person. Let's try to keep the comments to 90 seconds if possible.
So next we have Jonah.
Hi, thanks. So I guess I've been a long time cyclist, recently moved to the area. I live on the corner of Hopkins and Peralta. So I'm excited to see that you guys are improving the bike lane. Definitely what I notice now is that people don't quite know where to go. People kind of fan out in all directions. So I think having a designated bike path is great. I would advocate for solution 1B. I think parking is for residents in that area. It's, not everyone has a parking place. So I think it kind of is better for them. It also creates a buffer for people walking on the other side. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I've noted that. Next person, please.
Next we have Justin.
Hi, first I wanted to echo Nicole. As a driver in the area, Cedar Street is much more stressful to me than Rose Street currently. And one of the nice things about the crossing at Rose Street is that the path users are forced to turn and travel towards the oncoming traffic on the sidewalk. So I can see the bicyclists and bicyclists can see me. And so that's really nice. And we don't have that at Cedar Street. It crosses perpendicularly. The bicyclists show up there very suddenly. It's quite scary. With regards to the crossing at Peralta, I find your option 1A quite scary because it looks like there's going to be parked cars basically hiding the bike path from the drivers. And so if I'm a driver on Peralta, I'm not going to be able to see the bicyclists coming, and the bicyclists aren't going to be able to see me.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you. Comments noted. Next person, please.
Yes, next we have Ben.
Hi again, Ben Gerhardstein. I wanted to sort of echo Anthony's comments about supporting the option 1A with 1B also looking very good. I think one of the things I wanted to offer with respect to that Peralta and Hopkins intersection is that the crosswalk across Peralta is just is super wide, super, I don't know if wide is the right term or long. And you're doing a great job in both those options of adding a bulb out to the west side to shorten that crossing distance and slow turning vehicles. But it doesn't look like you're adding a bulb out on the east side and instead trying to do that with paint. And so I'm just, this is a budget thing, but if it's possible to bulb out that side too, then you're actually narrowing that crossing for pedestrians, creating more safe turning motions with motorists. And I think that would be of great benefit.
Got it.
I'll leave it
Yeah,
at that.
so your comment pertains to shortening the crossing distance on Peralta. So
Yep.
just noted that. Okay, great. Thank you, Ben.
And then last but not least, we have Amy.
Hi there. Short comments again, full on human scaled lighting and motion activated flashing beacons, I think are really crucial for safety. With the crossings, to me, 1B is preferable. Lots of kids use the Greenway heading to and from the park, and I think a separated facility on a busy street will be safer for everybody of all ages and abilities. As Justin pointed out, visibility for cyclists, pedestrians, and drivers is better in that option. And from a pragmatic standpoint, the reality is that residents want parking in front of their houses. And I know that's public space, but in my opinion, keeping it in front of their houses would create a lot less opposition, which could torpedo the project. So thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Amy. So if that was the last person with the raised hand for now, then I'll move on to the next section. There'll be a couple more opportunities for Q&A. Okay, so this next section is the pathway from Peralta to Gilman. We don't have any data about any collisions, and we are not proposing any removal of trees in this segment.
As shown in the photos on the previous exhibit, there are several, yeah, sorry, it is a little helpful, I think, to look at this first. There are several obstacles on either side of the existing path, including public art, community plantings, drainage inlets, street lights, and so we have started looking at that. And then if we could go to the next plan view, sorry, Ken. So right now, the existing path is about 10 feet wide. Our proposal is to widen to the 12-foot minimum path to provide the 2-foot shoulder, 2-foot shoulders on either side of the path, and then avoid major reconstruction of drainage and existing lighting, public art, and which, you know, all of those things would add quite a bit of cost to the project. So right now, that's why through this segment, we aren't proposing more than the widening to the 12-foot width.
Okay, and then moving further north to the Gilman Street crossing, we have some reported collisions, 4 cars colliding with parked cars, 1 overturned bike on its own, 2 cars that have collided with another car, and a car that collided with a pedestrian. We are not proposing to remove trees or parking spaces.
Yeah, and sorry, can we go back to the photo really quickly? Just because I think,
sure.
yeah, just because I think it's helpful. So approaching north on the Greenway, the photo on the bottom right just shows the stop sign is set back behind the large spark column. And it's really difficult to see if somebody stops back there because of the column and also some bushes and things to the right. So, so then going back to the plan view, one of the things that we really wanted to do is to, this is definitely an awkward intersection and not standard to have a 4-way stop and then the Greenway crossing at a diagonal like this. So one thing that we really wanted to do is get cyclists out in front of the columns so that they could stop and be able to see the intersection better and to be seen by vehicles. And in order to do this, we widened the approach on both sides of the columns and are proposing more of a directional approach because in order to get the bikes out in front of the columns, we needed to pull the outbound traffic, in towards the columns. So the extra wide width will also allow a lot more space for pedestrians and cyclists to pass each other as they approach and exit the intersection. Because a diagonal crossing is not standard, and there are no standard MUTCD guidance on this type of crossing, we were envisioning more of a treatment to the intersection using coloring that makes it feel to vehicles more like a shared use area, even though technically cyclists and pedestrians should be crossing each leg separately rather than crossing at a diagonal. But as Ken mentioned, there has been some accidents, but in general, the intersection functions pretty well. And really, so given the challenges here, I guess with the existing physical constraints, we felt that the most important thing was making sure that people are stopping out where they can be seen.
Okay, thank you, Jen. And then finally, we get to the Santa Fe Avenue crossing. We don't have any data regarding collisions. We are proposing to remove one tree that's under the BART tracks that's in poor condition. And we're going to show two different options for crossing improvements here. The first option includes a somewhat of an abrupt transition between the pathway and the sidewalk area, and includes a perpendicular crosswalk. So we'd be removing 2 parking spaces on the west side of Santa Fe. And then the second option includes a more gradual sweeping transition to a proposed new perpendicular crosswalk. And in that option 2, we'd be removing 1 parking spot on the west side and 1 on the east side of Santa Fe.
The biggest challenge that we found at this intersection is on the south approach to Santa Fe. Vehicles really have limited sight lines to the path, with the bushes and fencing coming up right to the edge of the path, to the south of the path, and then the column. It's just really challenging to see especially cyclists popping out from south of the crossing. And so initially we created this wide shared area in order to at least get pedestrians and cyclists onto the sidewalk where they could be visible from approaching vehicles prior to making the crossing. The jog isn't quite as direct, but it does reduce the crossing and the amount of time that pedestrians and cyclists are in the traffic lane, so reducing the time that they're at risk. The challenge with this one is that cyclists would have their backs to that approaching traffic. But again, this has a raised crossing, which has been shown to force vehicles to slow down. And also it would at least create this space where vehicles can see the cyclists and pedestrians. So yeah, the RFBs, raised crossing and high visibility markings. And then also with all of these options, the signage that's been noted as far as that these crossings are for cyclists and pedestrians would be incorporated. So that's option 1. And then option 2, after looking at this some more, my initial concern with sweeping through under the BART tracks was that large column that basically the path then comes out from behind the column. But after looking at it further and incorporating the the red curb, and actually looking at all the sight lines, we do feel that this is a good alternative in order to provide a more gradual transition for pedestrians and cyclists, and then to make a perpendicular crossing at the raised crossing with the RFBs, and the bulb out then becomes shorter. But there is adequate space before and after the column to see the cyclists coming through.
Okay, thank you, Jen. And so now we're coming to our third break, where we are asking for any questions or comments on this portion. And then after this break, we'll open it up for general questions and conclude the meeting. So I was thinking we could give 15 minutes here, and then the remaining time in the meeting will be for just general Q&A.
Okay, so we get started with Lisa Chow.
Hi. Yeah, I'm glad that this project includes this intersection. I live on Curtis, right at this is my intersection that I deal with every single day, and it's been a problem with ever since well, for quite a long time, but especially since I don't know who did it, whether it was the BART or whether it was the city, put in the curb cuts so that there was that diagonal crossing. And it encourages the diagonal crossing. And there's a little weeny stop sign on the path for bicyclists to use to stop, but they never stop. They just keep running across. They don't care who's crossing, whether it's a pedestrian or whether it's a car. They just ride on through, zip through. And joggers do that too. And I'm concerned that, you know, that someone's going to get hit one of these days. And for the most part, I mean, I see people stopping at the four-way stop, the cars. But, you know, if a bicyclist just keeps running through and doesn't stop, doesn't observe that stop sign, what are we supposed to do? You know, we're watching, but they just pop out. So I would suggest that the stop signs that are on the path should be placed much more prominently so that a bicyclist sees it and they know that it's for them to stop before they cross. And for the curb cuts to be redone so that it doesn't encourage that diagonal crossing, as it encourages it so that people think that they don't need to stop, they don't need to look to see what else is going on in that intersection. So that's my comment for that area. And I don't understand from what I read, this thing about a six-way stop. I don't understand what that's about.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so the idea, and we haven't totally fleshed out how it might work, is with a six-way intersection is to just kind of like if you had a three-way intersection or a four-way intersection, but this creates an added level of complexity, which we're hopeful that, I mean, it actually somewhat seems to work in that way. But like what you're saying, other times it doesn't, like if somebody is just ignoring the stop sign and going through.
Majority.
Sorry, and Ken, just as a clarification,
Mhm.
so that like a typical four-way stop has the approaches for the vehicles, those four approaches all stop.
Mhm.
Six-way, so it is the existing condition right now. It is kind of
Yeah.
like a six-way stop because
Yeah.
the bikes are supposed to stop and take turns with the vehicles at that intersection. Like you said, the existing stop signs are not very prominent and they're set back so far that a cyclist wouldn't even feel safe stopping that far back. They can't really see the intersection well, and the vehicles can't see them either if they actually stop back where the existing stop signs are.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Yeah. Thank you, Jen.
No problem.
Next person, please.
Yes, next we have the phone number ending 680. I will ask you to unmute and you have to press the star button and the 6 in order to unmute yourself.
Oh, yes. Hi. Thank you. This is Clifford on Peralta Avenue. I'd like to make some comments briefly. Please don't remove any parking on Hopkins or Peralta Avenue. Removing parking on Hopkins and Peralta Avenue will result in more auto break-ins, more catalytic converter thefts, and more car thefts. Thieves will quickly recognize the loss of street parking on Peralta and Hopkins as an opportunity to break into cars on adjacent streets. People on Peralta and Hopkins have healthcare workers who assist them at home. Home healthcare workers depend on easily accessible parking. With no place to park, many of these home healthcare workers will quit. People will lose their critical home health care and their lives will be put in danger. Some will have to go to nursing homes. There will be no place for delivery people who bring our food and medicine to park. People with driveways would be forced to back out into high-speed bicycle lanes. People without driveways, of which there are right on Hopkins and Peralta, where your plans would remove off-street parking, have no parking spaces, and they'll be trapped in their homes. If the Hopkins corridor plan, which would remove about 150 spaces on Hopkins between Gilman and Keynes, goes through, our parking crisis around Peralta and Hopkins would be any worse. So please do not remove any parking on Peralta and Hopkins. Also, please, no hot tar. Please find an alternative to using hot tar when you're improving and expanding these pathways. Air quality in West Berkeley is already very bad. We should not have to breathe hot tar during the construction period. Also, I ask that there be no new lighting on the path between Peralta and Gilman. There's too much lighting at night already. Night lighting disturbs our sleep and is bad for migratory animals. Why can't Berkeley move toward being a dark sky city like places like Flagstaff and parts of San Jose and San Diego? And to bicycle safety, I don't see why bicyclists in Berkeley can't obey the rules of the road. When bicyclists sail through stop signs and red lights, they endanger their own lives and the lives of pedestrians and motorists. And finally, where you are improving or expanding the pathway, there should be separate pathways for pedestrians so they don't get hit or pushed away by bicyclists.
People in wheelchairs.
And people in wheelchairs.
ADA, it's the law.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay, great. Great. Thank you. And we are looking into further into ADA considerations. We've already had discussions with our ADA consultant and have looked into state and federal requirements for that. So that will be taken into account as we move forward into detail.
Am I still on by chance? No.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Next person, please.
Yes, next we have Harry. Oh, Harry. There we go.
Hi, thank you for these plans. The improvements look really good to me. I had a question about the Curtis and Gilman intersection. Can you put up the plan diagram for that?
Yes. Oops. What did I do? I'm sorry, I pressed the escape button on accident and I lost. Am I not sharing the screen anymore?
No, all I see is the grid of participants now.
Okay.
Well, maybe you can just
Sorry.
answer it verbally. I saw as the bike and pedestrian traffic was approaching the Curtis and Gilman intersection, it seemed like each lane split into 2 lanes, and there was some yellow writing on those lanes that I was not able to read. I'm wondering if you can explain.
Yeah, I can take a stab at that. And I think, Ken, if you reshare your screen, then we could see the PowerPoint again.
I have to go through the slides.
Mm.
So this is at which location?
Curtis
Gilman.
and
Gilman. Okay.
Yeah, so the idea is at the approach, in order to bring that stop bar out, we were directing cyclists to go inside and pedestrians to go to the right of the cyclist. Basically because the pedestrians don't have to come to a full stop. But in order to narrow the stop bar and push it out in front of the column, we needed to get the cyclist to hug closer to that column. Here we go. Yeah, so sorry, it is hard to see that, but we would have bike symbols and then a pedestrian to the right. And then there would also be signage to show cyclists stay to the left. And then we did look at several different options for this, but it was just very challenging to get to be able to organize it in a way that we could push that stop bar forward in front of the column without like reconstruction of the intersection. And the other challenge here is that the turning movements at each of these corners are already very tight. So, you know, one consideration was if we could do any sort of bulbing here, but because the corners are already at a very tight radius, even for like very small trucks to make those turns, it's a little challenging. So yeah, in order to stay within the bounds of the geometry available, we had this idea of, you know, first splitting the directions as you approach the intersection, and then shifting cyclists to the left so that they can pass the slower pedestrians and then push them out in front of the column with the stop bar and the more prominent stop sign where vehicles could see them.
Okay, that's much clearer. Thanks. I think you've come up with a creative solution to a difficult problem. And at Santa Fe, I'm not sure I totally understood the 2 options, but option 2 looked to me like it creates a more natural direction of travel for people riding bikes, because it looked like in option 1, there was still the possibility of bicycles crossing diagonally if they chose to. I'm not sure I totally followed what but yeah, option 2 looks to me like it sort of creates a sense of flow where a bike rider will be more inclined to follow the crosswalk as it's printed, and to stay along the designated path of travel. So I do like that that S-shaped part leading up from the south. That's all. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Can I just interrupt real quick? We have about, I think, 9 people who have their hands raised, and we have about 10 minutes left in the meeting.
Okay. So maybe what we do is we call on all 9 people. If we run a little bit late, so be it. But I think that's about all we have time for. And then I also want to make some concluding remarks, because if people have some further questions or comments, there are ways to reach out to the project team. So I wanted to let everybody know that before we conclude the meeting.
Okay, next we will have Karen. And just to give Anthony, Jonah, and Amy a follow-up, I will first skip you guys and give the people a chance in the order who haven't talked yet, and then we'll add you after that.
Thank you so much. And before I start my comments, can I ask you to answer the two questions in the Q&A? They were clarifying questions. One is, do you know in Albany where there are separated bike, where there's a two-way bike lanes and then one-way pedestrian lane that's separated, how wide that path is? Like how much room do you need to be able to do that separation?
Hi, Karen, this is Phil. We have actually measured that, and it's 18 feet.
Okay.
Which is a little bit substandard of the current guidance would be, well, actually it's about the same. The current guidance would be having a 2-foot shoulder, 2 5-foot bike lanes, and then a 5-foot or 6-foot pedestrian area.
Yeah, the California would be 6 foot, the California standard, so 18-foot total.
Okay, great, thank you. And then the second question I had, can you go back to the slide at the Gilman intersection? And can you talk about the pavement treatment? It looks like you're proposing where you've got the whole pavement in red. Can you talk about what that is? It says street bond, repave intersection, and street bond treatment. Can you explain that color and pattern to be determined?
I can take that one too, Ken. Yeah, the idea there is there are these materials that are made now that you can use. You see a lot of things happening these days with people doing street murals and things like that at intersections. So there are materials that can put up with vehicles crossing over them, but you can create a graphic colored design in the intersection. So that's the idea for this intersection.
Okay.
So, and it would be on top of asphalt as proposed right now. So not like a stamped concrete.
Right.
It's more like a treatment similar, I guess, to like a green bikeway treatment.
Okay, that's super helpful. I wanted to just comment on this intersection. I'm really excited about the city doing this whole project, and I really appreciate all the attention to detail. This intersection, the pedestrian plan 2 times ago actually called for this intersection to be a fully raised intersection. And so I'm curious about, I haven't checked the latest pedestrian plan to see if it was still in there. But I do think it is a really good proposal. I know there's cost issues, but I also think there's a lot of argument that we might be able to apply for funding for this. I had a friend and colleague who was actually hit here in 2002, 2003, and she still does not speak. She was so badly brain injured, and she was a pedestrian in a crosswalk. She wasn't even crossing diagonally. She was in a crosswalk. So this intersection has long needed some really serious intervention. And I think essentially what you're describing and what's happening now is it's behaving like a slow street intersection, or, like the Voners, or, where all the different modes are having to slow down and be really careful, which I think is great. So I would encourage kind of any further investigation into whether an actual mural on the street might actually make it seem like a slow people down, or the stamped concrete, or a raised intersection, or kind of any other ways to further indicate that this is really a place for everyone to take special care. And so I appreciate you looking at that.
We did look into the raised intersection because it's also part of the bike plan. We did do some topo survey out here, and it's not really feasible to do a raised intersection because it's so flat. Is there anything else that you might want to add, Jen?
Sorry, the drainage at the corners is very flat, and then also the the middle of the intersection is actually already higher than the back of walk-in places. So it's really a grading and drainage challenge. And then there's also the existing parking that you can see in light orange to the east. Let's see, east
That's the
corner.
northeast.
North,
The northeast
yeah,
corner.
northeast, yeah. That is right. It's not standard to today's standards at all, but it's like right at that intersection also. Yeah, so there's several constraints associated with raising this.
Yeah. All right. Well, I appreciate hearing about those details. I still would encourage us that this might be a high enough priority intersection, given all of the different modes of transportation happening here. But, you know, if that's a funding issue that just needs the additional engineering and concrete to make that happen, I think we should be considering it here. I do really like the pulling out of the stop signs out beyond the concrete barriers. I think that's really going to help. I wanted to see that. I'm really glad that we're keeping the diagonal crossing. I think that's really important, because if you go back to the system where people riding a bike have to go in two different directions, they're actually having to cross the street twice, which is actually putting them in more danger. So I really like that you've committed to this diagonal crossing. I think it's really important. And then the last thing I'll say is that, well, two things. This Santa Fe crossing, I really like option 2 also. Your comment about the option 1, meaning that anybody riding their bike heading north ends up with the cars behind them and having to make a 90-degree turn is very concerning. So this option 2, I think, is fantastic. So I'm really excited about this option and the raised crosswalk. And then I just had a general comment about overall the project, that I hope that we are looking at kind of sturdier construction for the Greenway so that it's actually flat. Right now, it still feels like somebody poured along this whole stretch, like somebody just poured some asphalt in the park to make a place for people to walk and bike. Whereas, you know, in places like Emeryville and Albany and El Cerrito, they're committing to really kind of flat, excellent facilities. So I assume you're doing that, but I just wanted to stay in there. The last time they repaved the Ohlone Greenway in this section a couple of years ago, it really was just a terrible paving process, and actually in some cases made it worse. So I'm looking forward to the improvements. And thanks for all your effort on that.
Thank you. And also just to note about at least that portion through Cedar Rose Park where the pathway kind of goes up in grade. We're not going to be able to cut down any deeper, so that there's not that hump as you have to go up into the park and then back down because of the tree roots there. We're precluded from impacting the tree roots any further than they already are impacted. But
Yeah.
As we do our paving design, we are looking for opportunities to smooth things out, and you'll have a nicer, smoother surface.
That's great.
Yeah, and
once
one
we're
thing
done.
that we discussed with the geotechnical engineer, because we did take some borings along here, is a lot of the existing pathway through this area doesn't have any edge control. So it did permit the asphalt to kind of spread and change in elevation. So yeah, for the portions that we are able to reconstruct, we'll be looking to get better edge control to be able to hold those slopes.
Great, thank you so much.
Okay, how many more people do we have?
We have
Seven.
So 7.
7 more.
We're gonna continue with Dietmar Lawrence.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for your efforts. I've been riding this thousands and thousands of times, each intersection, so this is great stuff. I'm also the architect of the Westbury Beer Garden, so I'm interested at the Gilman Curtis intersection. Our firm, DSA Architects, also worked on the Blue Heron bike shop, adding the windows into the facade. And the long-term goal for that area adjacent to the building is kind of a seating area and a small commons. And for that, we would clip the sharp edge of that corner building to open it up to the sidewalk. And so one comment I have for Jennifer and Ken, and I talked to Ken when they had the table at the park, was
Yes.
that for that to work, for that commons area to work at that intersection, we'd much prefer the bike path to be equal width on either side of the column, 12 feet, which seems to be plenty, like 24-foot combined. But I will send you the plans and kind of revitalize the project. We have been talking to Councilperson Kesarani about that, and there had been a lease agreement negotiations that need to resume. So, but anyway, we're really excited about the improvements at this intersection, and the goal is really to turn the West Bay, the West Bay commercial neighborhood into this real nexus between the Greenway and neighborhood commercial zone, so that making it really an attractive bike destination. And related to that, I would like to propose trying to get a bike share station, you know, like the current iteration is called Bay Wheels, but they've changed over times, but a bike share station under the BART track south of Gilman. So there are kind of 3 column bays. The first one is where the path goes through, and then the middle one would be ideal to accommodate the standard bike share station. I think this would be a great intermediate location between the BART stations, as it's for many people just far enough from the North Berkeley BART station. And this would be the real people mover to get folks back and forth. And it's semi-protected. It has already lighting over it. And I think this would be a great use for the land under BART to really vitalize the area with the goal of making it really bike and pedestrian first. Thank you so much for your efforts.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Dietmar, and we did talk about that, and if you want to converse further, you know, you can send an email, and we can, especially with regard to the 12-foot width issue that you mentioned.
Will do. That's a small detail, but thank you so much for.
Okay, thank you. Next person, please.
Yes, next we have Michael Nettles.
Hi, thanks for calling on me. I wanted to just comment about how we're trying to squeeze so many people and dogs and pets and grandmas and everything onto this greenway. And, you know, there really isn't any space for bikes to commute. And so they're stuck on this really narrow and awkward, tiny space that has lots of little intricate turns and everything. So to achieve traffic harmony, what really needs to happen is there needs to be a lot of signage about this is a slow zone, right? You're not going to be able to just open up your bike and just go to cruising speed here. There needs to be share the path signs with walkers and small little toddlers and bikes. I've noticed a lot of conflicts between bikes and pedestrians on the trail because bikes are frustrated. They have to slow down, you know, because of a little girl's on a scooter or something. You know, there needs to be speed limit signs for bikes, very visible, slow zone, share the path, all of this. I agree with the guy that bikes need to, you know, obey the traffic rules. Absolute agreement, but it needs to go beyond that. We need to have signs that are expressly, this is a slow zone. Also, I'm in favor of having full out stop signs for cars at all of the intersections where there's not a stop sign. So that means Cedar, Rose, Santa Fe, and now Peralta. All of those intersections need stop signs for cars. Full stop. I support Cedar Rose idea that was floated that there be a path that goes west of those redwood trees. I think having a nice wide path there west of the redwood trees, I mean, it's too narrow to expand on the other side, so it should be expanded there. Finally, I'm just curious about the path between Gilman and Peralta. So is it 12 feet widening? Is that going to be all kind of cement or asphalt, or is it going to be part jogging path? Like, what is the total width of the path plan for that area?
Yeah, thank you for your comment. Jen, could you respond to the question about the width on the pathway between Gilman and Peralta?
Yeah, so we were proposing 12-foot paved width for a shared use path, 8-foot width plus 2-foot shoulders on either side is an absolute minimum. And for a high use path like this, it should really be 12-foot minimum paved. So that's what we're
So
proposing.
you're talking 12-foot paved and then 2-foot shoulders?
No, the 2-foot shoulders would be paved also.
Okay, all right. So are you hearing me about slow zone, share the path,
Yes.
speed limit, like all of that? I mean,
Yes.
bikes just have this unrealistic expectation that this is their freeway, but there's no place for them to go. There's no place a bike can ride and go like 6 blocks without having to stop. I mean, it's
Yes.
a
yes,
sad
yes,
thing.
we're
Cars
hearing
come
you.
first. And finally, I love the idea of the 1B for the Peralta Street with the parking on the home side. And it was primarily because the bikes would be hiding amongst the parked cars. That one comment, I'm in complete agreement with that as well. And then I want to be on the email list, but I forgot how to be on the email list. Like where do I
So
need?
there's a Q&A button on Zoom. Do you see it at the bottom of your screen? If you click that button and it allows you to type a
don't.
message, and then
It
so
says
you just,
apps. Is that it?
Debbie, can you help?
Yes, so there should be next to participants on the bottom, there should be a Q&A button. It can be that you don't have that button as you might not be on the latest Zoom version, but you can go to the website again that Ken mentioned in the beginning, and then maybe you can
Yeah,
blend it in the
I'll
end
touch
again.
upon this. There's an email address. I'll show you at the end, right after I get through.
Yeah, I don't. I guess I don't have the most updated.
Okay.
Zoom. I'm
Okay,
just-
let me just flash it on the screen so you can see it. Okay.
That's
All right.
the QR code.
Next question, please. Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Okay, next we have Linda Curry.
Oh, hello again. This is all looking wonderful, and most of it I really like. I do really want to jump onto what the last speaker just talked about, Michael, about signage, and that as you make these improvements, like from the stretch from Peralta to Gilman, you make it wider, flatter. It becomes like, any roadway that's nice like that, for a car, it's sort of a signal to go faster. And what I'm seeing there as a dog walker without my dog and bicyclists, is I'm seeing a lot of the electric mobility folks scaring the living heck out of me, as they weave in and out of the people walking their children in strollers and dog walkers with their leashes expanding across. It's pretty terrifying, actually, and there need to be like clear signage and maybe even some things in the roadbed that like vibrate when you cross them, letting people know you can't go faster than you need to be going slow in these zones. Especially at commute hours, there's a lot of traffic and people are in a hurry. So that's my one comment. And the other one is at Gilman Street, at that intersection, I've been walking there once right before Christmas time, across Gilman over to the Riveter, where there's a little gift shop there, middle of the day, Saturday, and I was in the middle of the crosswalk, and a car had stopped on the east side of Gilman and saw me and deliberately drove and made me jump and kind of scream. And the woman in the shop heard me and she said, "Oh, you don't know how many times a day I see cars drive through those stop signs or stop, do a rolling stop. It's getting to be more and more traffic and cars don't want to stop." So I really encourage, studies to be done. Maybe there needs to be some type of stoplight system there to really make cars stop, or definitely enforcement. I never see any enforcement in Berkeley anymore around cars or the way bicyclists are driving. So I like the raised area too, that Karen talked about, having it lifted if possible, and painted would be nice. So thank you.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. Got your comments noted.
Next we have Virginia. Virginia, are you there? You can speak now, you're unmuted. It seems like she is not able to speak.
Let's try back later
Yes.
and get to the next person.
Next we have Anthony.
Hello, thank you. I have comments about the Gilman intersection. And, you know, this is a special intersection, and I understand it's a challenging intersection. As it is drawn now, I have a lot of concerns because the present day condition is pretty concerning. It's dicey to go across there. Whenever I go across with a child, we have to form a big phalanx of bikes around them to get them through. You know, with 4 cars at the stop signs, you got to go through a lot of firing lines to get across that intersection. And I've biked on some of this street bond material on the Mill Valley Sausalito path. It'll vibrate my bike so I can hear it, and I know I'm approaching an intersection. But when I drive, I don't feel material like that. I think that the only reason the intersection is kind of workable now is that there's a couple of sharrows in the middle of it that make it clear, like, hey, bikes get a turn too. Don't run over the bikes when they come through. Look out. But if we were to remove those and just have this kind of beautified intersection, I think some of that message is lost. I'd like to see some real intense approaches taken to this intersection to make sure that all ages and abilities can use the Greenway all the way through. You know, if that can't be a table, and I would echo the comment that we need to do what we can to make that a tabled intersection. You know, consider like a right in, right out restriction for Curtis with a median diverter and a cut through on the diagonal, using the parking spaces to spread those lanes out. Consider like a center island, you know, something really major, because yeah, even if you're not seeing high stats in the crash statistics, just go out there and watch, and there's a lot of near misses. I'm sure there's a lot going unreported, and there's a lot of young folks and older folks who are unable to use the Greenway through that section because of how dicey it is.
Point well taken. Thank you. And I think it does deserve more of a look. So we will follow up on that. Next comment, please.
Next we have Jonah.
Hi. Yeah. Yeah. I just want to emphasize that. Yeah, it's definitely Gilman's. It's a unconventional intersection, I think, but I don't see an easy way to fix that. I don't think forcing people using the bike path, whether it's bikers or walkers or whatever, to cross over and do the double cross is necessarily it's probably gonna just create more mayhem. So I do think it kind of operates as a 6-way stop sign or a stopway, and that's, you know, it's not ideal, but it does kind of work. I think short of putting in lights there, I don't see that changing. And I really think the best thing is to kind of move towards a slow streets approach, where make it very clear that everyone just needs to go slow and stop and take turns. So that's just my general thought on that. And I think just be careful in the design of, even though you're, it looks like you're kind of spreading people out a little bit when you have like both sides paved and everything. And I think that could also just make, we just need to be careful that it doesn't create spreading out of everyone as they cross that intersection. So that's the other thing. And then on the other crossing, I do think that having it kind of swerve under the pylon, and then so the bikers and people on the and runners and whatnot on the bikeway can look to their left and see cars coming, and cars can clearly see them is a good approach. So that's my thoughts.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Got that noted. Next, please.
Okay, we have Amy.
Hello again. God, thanks for this. This is fantastic. I really appreciate it. Just wanted to address the Santa Fe crossing options. Currently, I use that, I cross that, multiple times a week. Currently on the south side of Santa Fe, west of the Greenway, there is enough red curb, so the visibility is terrible because the angle is really acute, and construction and delivery trucks always park in that first space or first two spaces, and they're large and they have equipment on top. So drivers can't see cyclists and pedestrians. Cyclists and pedestrians can't see cars coming, and it's super hazardous with the bad angle. I hope the city could red curb at least one space even before this project is implemented to create safer conditions. I also agree option 2 seems to be the only option that removes the parking space there to increase visibility, so it's safer and it creates better crossing angles, as a couple of speakers have mentioned previously. In response to the speaker complaining about the lighting, lights at a human scale, like on the Ped Cyclist Bridge over I-80, do not encroach into residences, so would not create any light pollution, and lights are the only way for Greenway users to actually walk and ride safely at night and early morning. So we need them. Separated lanes for all cyclists and pedestrians and wheelchairs, as there are in some segments of Albany, will help keep all users of all ages and abilities safer and more comfortable. So I think separated lanes are going to solve a lot of the problems that people are complaining about. And the improvements around Westbury Beer Garden sound great for the community. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Amy.
Okay, let's try Virginia again.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm sorry. Let's see. Thanks for doing this. I just want to add my comments to the things about when I'm walking. It is very scary. I don't think that those little electrical mobility things are really going slow enough at all. And bicycles too. It's during certain parts of day, we can't even walk there. So I hope that gets improved. I'm sorry, I was out of town, so I'm kind of late on this. But as far as somebody saying hot tar, I think I don't agree with that. I don't know what kinds of materials you guys can use now, but for walking, asphalt is much easier to walk on than concrete. So I hope you have something softer than concrete for people to walk on. If you have to take trees out, I hope you put other green stuff in and care with the lighting. That I live right next to the path, and it is kind of invasive, but thank you for considering pedestrians too.
Thank you, Virginia. Got your comments noted. Do we have anybody else, Debbie?
We have Karen again. Oh,
Thank you. I will be super quick. I just wanted to follow up on that last comment, and we've heard a bunch of them before. I'm really personally concerned that we're not switching this greenway to separating bikes and pedestrians. I think then, we are getting significantly increased people choosing to ride bikes, which is wonderful and it meets all of our city goals. But there is increasing concern from pedestrians about kind of being passed and being frightened when they're passed by people on bikes. And, I just think that's why all of the cities surrounding us have decided to go to the separated paths. And I would really like to see the tension between pedestrians and people riding bikes. We're all trying to get places, not in a car. And I would love to see us, implementing a project that can help kind of reduce that tension. So that's it. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you. And so it kind of gets back to what I was talking about earlier. If we want to widen the pathway, especially to the point where we have separate lanes for bikes and pedestrians, then the way to do that is to, especially in these constrained areas, is to remove vegetation. But that's definitely something that's kind of more at a citywide policy level, and it's not something that that city staff can just make a decision on. Debbie, is that it for questions?
That's it for all raised hands.
Okay.
Phil, do you have any additional comments from the Q&A?
No, more people have been giving emails, so that's great. We have those
Okay.
now too, but yeah, no more
Okay.
questions.
Okay, very good. Yeah, so we're a little bit past time, but I appreciate everybody's participation. Hopefully this presentation gives you a better idea of the background on the project and why we are designing things, at least at a conceptual level, how we got to this point. And hopefully it kind of lays out a map for, our next steps moving forward. I did want to reiterate that we still have the online survey open if you haven't taken it already. The survey link is on the project website, and it will remain open until March 1st. And also, if you have any further questions or comments, you can send them to the project email address, which is shown on the screen. It's Ohlone Greenway at cityofberkeley.info. Did I cover anything, or did Phil, you or Jen wish to say anything else before we close out the meeting?
No, I think it's been great to hear all the input. I don't have anything else.
Yeah, the input has been really good, and I, it just shows how much the community, really thinks about and values this greenway and how much use it gets. So appreciate all the input, and it's gonna take a while for us to kind of go through all of it, but we will be reviewing all of the data. So with that, thanks again for attending this meeting, and we'll try to keep you updated. So if you get on the project email list, we'll let you know when we provide updates on the project website, but that will be our primary tool for communicating with the public, is providing updates on the project website. So thank you, and good night.